The dead man lay on the cold stone floor of the Château d'Annecy, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling. Blood pooled around his head, a stark contrast to the pristine white of his ruffled collar. The air was thick with the scent of damp stones, and the faint trace of a recent rain. The guards, their faces pale with shock, stood frozen, their hands trembling. They had just witnessed the assassination of Eustace Chapuys, one of the most influential men in the Duchy of Savoy. But let's rewind a bit. Before the blood, before the shock, we need to understand who this man was and why his death sent ripples through the political and social fabric of the time. Eustace Chapuys was born in the charming old city of Annecy, nestled at the foot of the Alps in southeastern France, not far from the Swiss border. The exact year of his birth is uncertain, but most historians agree it was around 1489. Annecy, with its picturesque cobblestone streets and medieval architecture, was a bustling city of about 50,000 people. It was the capital of the department of Haute-Savoy, which, along with the neighboring department of Savoy, formed the western half of the Duchy of Savoy. This duchy, straddling the Alps between France and Italy, was a strategic and valuable region, often the subject of territorial disputes. Eustace's family, the Chapuys, were not nobles but rather a family of enterprising commoners. His great-grandfather, Pierre, was a stonemason who worked on the city walls. His grandfather, Antoine, became a notary and a thriving landowner, significantly improving the family's social and financial standing. Eustace's father, Louis, followed in Antoine's footsteps, becoming a notary and serving on the town council. Despite some missteps, such as his failure as market overseer, Louis was a respected and influential figure in Annecy. Eustace's early life was shaped by the rich cultural and political milieu of the late 15th and early 16th centuries. This was an era of humanism and the Renaissance, where old feudal structures were weakening, and new ideas were challenging the status quo. The Church of Rome was facing increasing scrutiny, and scientific and scholarly inquiry were making significant advances. The printing press, invented by Gutenberg, was revolutionizing the spread of knowledge, making it accessible to more people than ever before. Eustace showed a keen interest in these intellectual pursuits from a young age. He entered university at the precocious age of 15, where he excelled in law and diplomacy. His talents did not go unnoticed, and he soon found himself in the service of the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. As the imperial ambassador to the Tudor court in England, Eustace played a crucial role in the politics of the time, particularly during the turbulent reign of King Henry VIII, but his life was not without its challenges. Eustace was known for his shrewd and often manipulative nature, traits that both helped and hindered him in his diplomatic career. He was deeply involved in the political intrigues of the time, often finding himself caught between the conflicting interests of the Holy Roman Empire and the Tudor court. Despite his many successes, Eustace's life ended abruptly and violently. The exact circumstances of his assassination remain a mystery, but it is clear that his death was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of the wider political and social tensions that were brewing in Europe at the time. The body of Eustace Chapuys, once a powerful and influential man, now lay cold and still, a stark reminder of the dangers and complexities of the political world he had navigated so deftly. The guards, still in shock, slowly began to gather their wits, knowing that the news of his death would soon spread and the consequences would be far-reaching. The city of Annecy, with its medieval charm and tranquil beauty, would never be the same. The legacy of Eustace Chapuys, a man of intellect and ambition, would live on, but his story was far from over. The search for the truth behind his assassination was about to begin. Eustace Chapuys grew up in a time of great change and turmoil. His father died when Eustace was just a teenager, leaving his mother, Gigon, and her children to manage the family's inheritance. Unfortunately, some of this property was co-owned with Eustace's uncle, Pierre, which led to a long and costly legal battle. Eustace and his mother had to sue Pierre to get their fair share. This lawsuit was a tough financial strain on the family, but they managed to stay afloat. Despite the challenges, Eustace's parents, Louis and Gigon, had high hopes for him. They made sure he received a top-notch education, following a family tradition. Eustace started his studies in Annecy, a town in the Duchy of Savoy, and then moved on to the prestigious Turin University. This university was known for its excellent law program and its strong connection to the Duke of Savoy. Eustace began his studies there in 1507, just after the famous humanist Desiderius Erasmus had graduated. At Turin, Eustace learned about civil and canon law, but he also absorbed the new ideas of humanism, a movement that emphasized the study of classical texts and the importance of individual potential. After a few years, Eustace's studies took him to other parts of Italy, including Rome and Pavia, both centers of learning and culture. In 1515, he completed his doctorate in civil and canon law, although the exact location of his graduation is still debated. During his time in Italy, Eustace built a network of influential friends. One of his closest friends was François Bonnivard, a Swiss ecclesiastic and historian. Eustace also met Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, a German reformer and humanist in Pavia. Agrippa was known for his interest in the occult and his broad scholarship. Despite the differences in their interests, Eustace and Agrippa formed a strong bond, and Agrippa even appointed Eustace as the guardian of his son, Haman. Eustace's career took a significant turn when he moved to Geneva, a city that was a hub of political and religious activity. He was ordained and became a canon of Geneva Cathedral. In 1517, he was appointed secretary to the Prince Bishop of Geneva, Jean de Savoy, a cousin of the Duke of Savoy. This role gave Eustace valuable experience in diplomacy and administration. He was known for his eloquent speeches and his skill in Latin, and he often conducted diplomatic missions to Swiss cities like Fribourg and Bern, which were aligned with the Habsburgs, a powerful rival to the Duke of Savoy. In 1524, when Pierre de la Baume succeeded Jean de Savoy as Bishop of Geneva, he appointed Eustace as the Dean of Volonnex, a position that provided a modest income for the rest of his life. Eustace's role in Geneva's politics and his connections with the ducal court of Savoy continued to grow. He was known for his ability to navigate complex political and religious issues, and he maintained friendships with both conservatives and reformers. One of the more mysterious aspects of Eustace's life was his illegitimate son, Cessair. Cessair's birth is a subject of debate, with some suggesting he was born between 1510 and 1527, and others placing his birth at the end of Eustace's first English embassy in 1539. Eustace never mentioned Cessair in his letters to his family, but a letter from 1549, thanking the mayor of Annecy for his condolences on Cessair's death, reveals that Eustace was deeply affected by the loss. This suggests that Cessair was likely born before Eustace's diplomatic career in England, possibly during his time in Geneva. By 1522, tensions between the Duke of Savoy and Geneva were high. Eustace, who had been active in Genevan politics, retreated to Annecy for a time. When he returned to Geneva, the situation had worsened, and Emperor Charles V was increasing his military presence in the city. Eustace was appointed as the ecclesiastical representative of the Genevan Savoyards, tasked with mediating between the Duke of Savoy and the imperial commander, Charles III, Duke of Bourbon. This role required Eustace to use all his diplomatic skills and patience. In 1526, Eustace's talents caught the attention of the Duke of Bourbon, who offered him a position as his personal representative to Emperor Charles V's court in Granada, Spain. Eustace accepted, and his career took a new turn. He earned a pension from the imperial household and became a trusted counselor and master of requests, a position that involved handling legal matters and receiving petitions on behalf of the emperor. Eustace's service to the emperor brought him into the company of powerful figures like Nicolas Perronat de Granvelle, a key advisor to Charles V. This exposure to the highest levels of imperial politics prepared Eustace for his next challenge. In 1529, Emperor Charles V needed a new ambassador to England to replace Inigo de Mendoza, who had failed to secure an alliance and support for Queen Katherine of Aragon against Henry VIII's efforts to annul their marriage. Eustace was chosen for this crucial role. Mendoza's tenure as ambassador had been fraught with difficulties. He was arrested by the French on his way to London, and later struggled to navigate the complex political landscape at the English court. He was outmaneuvered by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who sought to become the next pope and therefore had a vested interest in maintaining good relations with the emperor. Wolsey made Mendoza's life difficult, intercepting his letters and preventing him from effectively supporting Queen Catherine. Eustace Chapuys was about to step into a highly charged and challenging diplomatic environment. His skills, experience, and connections would be put to the test as he took on the critical role of representing the Holy Roman Emperor in the court of Henry VIII. In 1528, a tense and challenging year for England, the kingdom found itself in a delicate position. King Henry VIII was determined to end his marriage to Queen Katherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, a young and captivating lady of the court. This decision had far-reaching consequences, not just for the royal couple, but for the entire kingdom. The situation was further complicated by England's strained relations with the Holy Roman Empire, led by Charles V, and its alliance with France. Two key figures, Juan Vives and Don Inigo de Mendoza, were placed under house arrest by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, the powerful Lord Chancellor. This isolation meant that Vives and Mendoza were cut off from Queen Catherine and the court, leaving them in the dark about the ongoing developments in Henry's great matter, the king's wish to divorce Catherine. Vives was interrogated about his communications with Mendoza, particularly regarding his dealings with Catherine and his correspondence with the Pope. For Catherine, this was a deeply isolating time. Mendoza, who had been her staunch advocate, was as much a prisoner as she was. When Mendoza eventually asked to be recalled and left England, Catherine felt even more alone and desperate for support. Catherine needed a new advocate, someone who could navigate the complex political landscape of the court, build alliances, and champion her cause. She required someone with legal and canonical training to address the legal questions surrounding her marriage to Henry. This person had to be charming, skilled in subterfuge, and above all, not a Spaniard, as Spaniards were often distrusted. The Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, also needed a diplomat who could maintain cool and shrewd relations with England. Eustace Chapuys, a 40-year-old Savoyard canon and civil lawyer, was the perfect candidate. With over a decade of experience in European courts, Chapuys possessed the necessary legal and diplomatic skills, as well as high-level contacts and a reputation for charm and discretion. He was already working under Nicolas Perronat de Granvelle, a key figure in the Holy Roman Empire, on the issue of Henry and Catherine's marriage. Chapuys had shown a mastery of the relevant arguments and was well prepared for his new role. When Charles V appointed Chapuys as his ambassador to England, he provided detailed instructions. Chapuys was to travel to England and meet with Don Inigo de Mendoza, who would help him settle in. If Mendoza had already left, Chapuys was to find out if the Archduchess, Charles's aunt, had sent another representative. Chapuys was to seek advice from Queen Catherine and discuss her situation with her, reassuring her that he was there to defend her interests. He was to present Charles's letters to King Henry VIII, emphasizing that the matter of the marriage should be decided by the Pope in Rome, not in England. Chapuys was to use his skills to persuade Henry to maintain his marriage to Catherine, and to foster a friendly relationship between England and the Holy Roman Empire. Chapuys's journey to London was not without preparation. He visited Mendoza in Antwerp for a thorough briefing. Mendoza shared his experiences and insights into the court's dynamics, the characters of the English nobles, and the challenges he faced. Chapuys carefully noted this information, understanding the complex and often treacherous environment he was entering. By the time Chapuys arrived in London in late August 1529, the king's great matter was a topic of intense discussion at court. Chapuys's first report to Charles V confirmed the growing intimacy between Henry and Anne Boleyn. He noted that Henry's affection for Anne was so strong that it could hardly be greater. Chapuys's mission was multifaceted. He had to address trade and financial issues, smooth relations between Henry and Charles, and counter French influence. Most importantly, he was tasked with helping reconcile Henry and Catherine, using his legal expertise and diplomatic skills. Chapuys was pleased to find that Cardinal Wolsey, once a powerful figure, was now in disgrace. Wolsey had failed to secure a papal annulment for Henry's marriage, and had failed to persuade Catherine to enter a nunnery. His efforts to form an alliance with France against Charles had also fallen apart. Wolsey was despised by many, including Anne Boleyn, who blamed him for the delay in securing the divorce, and by the English nobles and common people who resented his wealth and influence. Henry, at 38, and Catherine, at 44, had been married for 29 years. Their marriage had produced only one living heir, Princess Mary. Henry and his nobles believed that only a male heir could ensure a smooth and uncontested succession. Mary, being a princess, might have to marry a foreign ruler, potentially placing England under foreign rule. At 6, Mary had been betrothed to Charles V, but he broke off the engagement to marry Isabella of Portugal, much to Henry's offense. Henry argued that his lack of a male heir and Catherine's miscarriages and stillborn children were divine punishment for their marriage. He claimed that their union violated the Old Testament prohibition in the book of Leviticus, which states that a man should not marry his brother's widow. Pope Julius II had issued a dispensation in 1503, allowing Henry to marry Catherine, but Henry's advisors suggested that the dispensation might have been beyond the Pope's authority or defective in some way. Thus, in 1527, Henry appealed to Pope Clement VII to annul the marriage and allow him to marry someone lawfully. Catherine was deeply offended by these claims. She insisted that her marriage to Henry was valid because she and Arthur had never consummated their union, meaning there was no affinity and no impediment to her marriage with Henry. She believed that Henry's fears were baseless, even if the papal dispensation was faulty. As Chapuys settled into his role, he faced a daunting task. He needed to balance the complex political and personal issues surrounding the king's great matter, while maintaining good relations between England and the Holy Roman Empire. The stakes were high, and Chapuys knew that his success or failure would have significant implications for both kingdoms. In the bustling court of King Henry VIII, where politics and power were as entangled as the ivy on the castle walls, the arrival of Eustace Chapuys, the new imperial ambassador from Emperor Charles V, was a momentous event. Charles V was not just any ruler. He was the powerful Holy Roman Emperor, and more importantly, the nephew of Queen Katherine of Aragon, Henry's wife. The air was thick with tension, as the king's desire for a divorce from Catherine had turned the court into a battleground of wills and alliances. Henry and his chief minister, Cardinal Wolsey, had a straightforward view. If one pope had allowed the marriage, another pope could undo it. They failed to see that Catherine, a proud Spanish princess and the aunt of the most powerful man in Europe, would not surrender her position without a fight. Catherine, daughter of the famous King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who had expelled the Moors from Spain and built an empire, was not about to let go of her status as queen and wife. She had already appealed to her nephew, Charles, for help, even though England and France had formed an alliance against him in 1527. Catherine's determination was unshakable. She refused to accept a divorce, which would have made her daughter marry a bastard. Wolsey, trying to save face, pleaded with her to agree to the divorce, but she rejected his pleas with contempt. Instead, she fought with all her intelligence and religious conviction to protect her position. Her nephew, Charles, sent a new ambassador, Chapuys, to support her cause and test the limits of his influence. Just before Chapuys arrived, Catherine received a powerful piece of evidence, a transcript of a dispensation from Pope Julius II, dated 1503, which assumed that Catherine and her first husband, Arthur, had consummated their marriage. This document, retrieved from Spain, threatened Henry's case by suggesting that even if Arthur and Catherine had been intimate, it was no barrier to her marriage to Henry. Wolsey, sensing the danger, demanded that Catherine ask Charles to send the original document to Henry. However, Catherine, fearing it would disappear if it fell into Wolsey's hands, told Charles to ignore the demand. Charles sent a notarized copy, which should have been enough, but Henry rejected it and insisted on the original. Chapuys arrived in England with a clear understanding of the complex issues he faced. The political landscape was in constant flux, with alliances shifting between England, France, Charles, and the Pope. The Pope, Clement VII, had been a virtual prisoner of Charles's forces in 1527, and he was wary of provoking the Holy Roman Emperor again. Clement delayed the decision on Henry's request for a divorce, and when he finally agreed to let the case be heard in England, he appointed Wolsey and a special legate, Cardinal Campeggio, to try the case. Campeggio was instructed to delay the proceedings, and the trial, which opened on May 31, 1529, was adjourned on July 23 without reaching a conclusion. The following month, Charles's forces defeated the French, and Clement, now more aligned with Charles, transferred the case to Rome. The religious landscape was also changing. The Reformation, led by Martin Luther, was spreading across Europe, and reformist ideas were finding a foothold in England. William Tyndale's book, The Obedience of a Christian Man, argued that the Church had usurped the loyalty that belonged to monarchs, a notion that intrigued Henry. The Church, in response, condemned these ideas as heretical and stood firm on its traditions. Wolsey, under pressure to satisfy Henry, warned the papal representative, Gregory Casale, that the king might adopt any remedy necessary, even if it harmed the Pope. Wolsey's position was precarious, and by early 1529, his enemies, including Anne Boleyn and her family, were accusing him of stalling. Wolsey's influence at court began to wane. Chapuys, who initially spoke little English, relied on French and Latin in his conversations. He was granted his first meeting with Henry on September 21, 2015, after a month in England. The king, a robust and active man, was in a hurry to return to his hunting. Chapuys noted Henry's attempts to convince him of his expertise in canon law, and his reasons for seeking a divorce. Henry granted Chapuys permission to visit Katherine, who was living in the same household as Anne Boleyn. Katherine, when she met Chapuys, expressed her gratitude for his support. She urged him to remind Henry of Charles's interest in the case, and advised him to use persuasion rather than threats. Katherine, with 20 years of marriage behind her, knew Henry well and understood how to approach him. Chapuys quickly identified the key players at court, including the Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle. Norfolk, who had become a powerful figure as Wolsey's influence declined, met with Chapuys to discuss the political situation. Chapuys reported to Charles that the administration of affairs had shifted to Norfolk, and that Wolsey had been set aside from his role as chancellor. The arrival of Chapuys marked a turning point in the struggle for Henry's divorce. With the Holy Roman Empire watching closely, the court of Henry VIII was about to enter a new and more intense phase of the battle. The story of Chapuys and his diplomatic mission in England is one of intricate political maneuvering, deep personal convictions, and the high stakes of royal marriages. When Chapuys first met Norfolk, the encounter seemed promising. Norfolk, being Anne Boleyn's uncle, had a lot to lose if Henry VIII's marriage to Katherine of Aragon was annulled. Chapuys, representing the Holy Roman Emperor, tried to persuade Norfolk to support Katherine, emphasizing that the emperor expected Norfolk, as a true knight, to act with honor and conscience. Norfolk, however, was pragmatic. He explained that the matter was in the hands of the church and legal experts, most of whom had already declared the marriage invalid. Norfolk also hinted that if the emperor had remained neutral, the issue might have been resolved more amicably. Chapuys, a skilled diplomat, navigated these waters carefully. He complimented Norfolk and the English nobility, suggesting that they were better suited to manage the kingdom's affairs than the low-born Wolsey. Norfolk, flattered, denied that any one person controlled the state, insisting it was the king's privy council that made decisions. As Chapuys settled into his role, he began to understand the complex web of loyalties and ambitions at the Tudor court. He met with other ambassadors and courtiers, but his impressions were mixed. He noted that many who professed loyalty to the emperor were also accepting bribes from France, and he was wary of their true intentions. The real test came when Chapuys formally presented his credentials to Henry VIII. The king, known for his charm and intelligence, tried to gauge Chapuys' stance on the divorce. Henry, flanked by his counselors, listened as Chapuys explained his mission. Henry, always the politician, welcomed Chapuys, but also issued a veiled warning about the importance of discretion. In a private conversation, Henry attempted to justify his position on the divorce, suggesting that the papal dispensation allowing his marriage to Katherine might be a forgery. Chapuys, ever the diplomat, responded with a mix of flattery and subtle persuasion, suggesting that Henry inwardly approved of the emperor's actions. The evening after the formal meeting, Chapuys dined with Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father. Thomas, despite his daughter's interests, declared his affection for the emperor and his hope for a strong alliance. Chapuys, equally diplomatic, reciprocated, and the two men shared a moment of mutual respect. Meanwhile, the fall of Cardinal Wolsey, once Henry's most trusted advisor, was unfolding. Wolsey, desperate to regain the king's favor, requested an audience but was rebuffed. The Boleyns and Norfolk, seeing Wolsey as a threat, ensured he could not meet the king. Wolsey's public disgrace was complete when he was charged with premunire, and the Great Seal was taken from him by Norfolk and Suffolk. Despite this, Wolsey never lost hope of regaining Henry's trust. Katherine, aware of the growing threat to her position, was deeply concerned about the upcoming Parliament. Norfolk and Thomas Boleyn were working to stack the assembly with supporters, making it likely that the king's quest for a divorce would gain momentum. Chapuys, in his reports to the emperor, emphasized the urgency of the situation. He believed that the only way to secure Catherine's position was for the case to be tried in Rome, where the Pope could provide a fair judgment. Henry, however, refused to accept the Pope's order to appear in Rome, seeing it as an insult to his authority. The king's determination to annul his marriage and marry Anne Boleyn was unwavering. Chapuys, despite his best efforts, could not change the course of events. The stage was set for a dramatic and far-reaching transformation of the English church and state, with Chapuys as a witness to the beginning of a new era in English history.